So, welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success story series of interviews, where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes, their challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this morning, I'm delighted to have with us David Thompson, who's Director of Spirit of Yorkshire. So, David, firstly, thank you for coming on board. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Spirit of Yorkshire, the wonderful products you have, and where you are, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having us. I'm David Thompson, and I co-founded Yorkshire's first single malt whiskey distillery in 2016, which to a lot of people would think, good grief, you're making whiskey in Yorkshire. But that was probably one of the reasons why we did it, because nobody else had done it, and we were in an ideal situation in terms of the raw materials to make whiskey on the Yorkshire Wolds, which is barley. So really our business was born out of a diversification from farming, barley farming, into firstly making beer and then secondly making whiskey.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Must have been quite, I mean, I just think about that. Being the first must be a big challenge.
Yeah, and it's a challenge, but it's also a drive as well because
Yes.
to be the first of anything is unique. You can never not be the first once you've been the first. And I think we wanted to really put this area on the map as well in terms of the whiskey map. Everybody associates single malts with Scotland,
Yeah.
and clearly they've done a great, fantastic job for centuries. And one of the biggest battles was getting around the problem of this preconceived idea that you can't make whiskey anywhere else but Scotland. In fact, to this day, we get people saying you can't call it whiskey, but actually you can call it whiskey. You just can't call it Scotch.
Yes. Of
So
course.
we had the raw materials, which traditionally, Chris, would have been sent up to Scotland to make their whiskey anyway.
Right.
And you can tell that by the fact we've got two or three of the biggest malting factories around the Yorkshire Wolds, close to where the raw material is grown. So, we felt that we wanted that opportunity to not do something first, but actually do something really, really well from the materials that we grew
Brilliant.
for 4 generations.
Wonderful. You've hinted on it a little bit already, but if we talk a little bit about your background, how you got into business, I appreciate that with the barley connection, but and why this particular one. But I guess one of the questions could be why whiskey, when I guess there could be other options.
Yeah. Yeah, well, my background was, leaving school, wasn't really sure what I was going to do. At some point, I was going to join the Marines, but never quite made it. And I did a summer job on a farm, and growing up and working the harvest, if you like, really pointed me in that career direction. I wanted to really get involved in agriculture, but not from a farming background. We didn't have a farm, so the next step was really how could I get involved without having my own land,
Yes.
and that was really working within the industry of supply industry to farming. So I worked for a big international company back then who were trying to set up an area in Yorkshire to buy and sell, would you believe, malting barley. I cut my teeth very, very young in terms of understanding the crop and how to grow a great crop of malting barley. And then I worked with the farmers in the area to do the sort of crop management side of it and the buying of the product. And that's where I met my friend and now business partner, Tom Mellor, who's a fourth generation barley farmer.
Brilliant.
And he was trying to diversify sort of back in the sort of early 2000s away from just growing crops because they really weren't that profitable at the
Yes.
time. And it was when people going into cheese making, which we were just talking about earlier on,
Yep.
or maybe they were into holiday cottages or something else that could use
Yes.
the raw materials or the property around them. And Tom had two things. He had water on the farm, which was from a borehole that was sunk way back in his grandfather's era, and actually is the only supply of water on the farm.
Right.
And he grew the malting barley. So back in 2003, he started to look at the idea of making beer, and a company was born from that called World Top Brewery, of which is actually a brand which is all over the place now. You'll see it in every
Yes.
supermarket, and that's where the idea came from, and then the brand of Walt Top came from. However, one of the main parts of making beer is actually almost the same as making whiskey, which is making a beer to distill. And we call that a wash. It's slightly different, so we're not adding hops or flavor, but it's slightly different.
Yep.
But effectively, it's the same equipment. So all we needed was, as you can see behind me, was some copper stills, which sounds simple, but it wasn't, to actually get these manufactured for us. And then we started making whiskey in 2016. So it's really a big diversification project away from purely farming.
Wonderful. Absolutely. What a great story. And I guess you must have had quite a few challenges and issues over that time. What are the biggest ones that come to mind?
I think there's always challenges in business, but I mean, the problem with whiskey is that actually you can't sell a drop until it's over 3 years old. So we have to distill, we have to then put that into oak casks to mature, and a day after 3 years, it becomes whiskey. So the challenge with anything like that is funding that period of time. A lot of companies actually make white spirits or gin in particular, and we saw a big boom of that over the last sort of 15, 20 odd years.
Yes.
Making gin is relatively simple because the majority of gin makers just buy in the spirit and then redistill it and flavor it. So literally you can have a bottle in your hand the day after you produced it to sell. Obviously with whiskey, you can't do that. We did think about white spirits, but because we are very much about using our own barley to produce whiskey, you can't actually make the neutral grain spirit you need for gin in the equipment we've got. So we would have to invest in a completely different setup to do that. So our sort of focus was really on using the raw materials and all the way through from field to bottle. So we never did gin.
No, wonderful. And I guess like a bunch of the population, I was watching Clarkson's farm recently, and there was different grades of grain. Is that
That
makes, because, and I believe sort of the the brewing and the distilling grains are quite the top end of that. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, malting barley is a variety-led thing. So you choose the right variety to do the job, but then you need the right soil type and the right conditions. So malting barley doesn't need a lot of fertile land. If you want fertile land, you go down to Holderness and you plant wheat and you grow large crops of wheat. Up on the Yorkshire Wold, it's quite thin calcareous soil, not particularly fertile, and that's perfect for malting barley. So you can only really grow it in areas that has the right sort of land type and the right sort of temperatures in the year. So it really loves the sea breeze. It loves the coolness of the coast. So if you drew a picture of where the majority of malting barley was grown, it's probably around the coast and down the east coast, because it doesn't like to get its feet wet either. So it doesn't like a lot of moisture. So it is quite fickle, but we obviously that's our starting place is the farming side, and we've done a lot in the last few years to make sure that we're growing that crop in the most sort of friendly way as possible. And what I mean by that is we have stopped ploughing the soil, so we're looking after the land. And if you plough soil, you're releasing carbon to atmosphere, and you're also sort of breaking up the soil structure. So we haven't ploughed for 5 years now. So this is really making that soil healthy again. The worm population's increased, the crops are increasing naturally. And so we're heading towards that regenerative farming process, then attaching that to our barley and our whiskey. So yeah, it's really important.
And forgive my ignorance, but obviously wines will have certain years are better than others. Is that a similar thing in whiskey, or is it the process makes it fairly consistent?
Yeah, I know that the barley will yield differently or have different qualities, but one quality that it doesn't have is an impact on flavour in particular. Because if you think about whiskey, we process it so much. So after we've harvested it, we dry it, and then it goes to be malted, which is a process of growing the grain, and it produces enzymes and then sugars, so we can ferment those sugars. It then gets dried, that drying process can be anything from chocolate malt, which is a dark stout type malt, all the
Okay.
way through to pale malt and everything in between. We use pale malt because we don't want a massive influence of flavour coming from that process. Then we distill it. Oh, sorry. Then we actually mash it. So we're fermenting, and then we're adding yeast, which is adding flavour. And then we distill it slowly, quickly, depending on the conditions at the time. And then we choose a cask to flavour it and,
Brilliant.
and add and mature it. So
Yes.
all those processes have are choice driven by the distiller and will have an influence on flavour. So the barley really is just that package of sugar that allows us to build those flavors upon it.
Yeah.
So that's how it works. So we don't really get vintage harvest, but we do get great whiskies from a particular cask at a particular moment. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And as growing the business, well, what are some of the biggest learnings you've got about business in general? What were the things you'd advise people on?
Oh, it's a difficult one. I mean, for me, looking back, start earlier. I wish I'd started this project not in my sort of late 50s. Whiskey in particular is not a quick industry to build, and there's a lot of challenges on the way, obviously.
Yes.
So for me, start earlier. Don't underestimate how much money you need to finance the early stages of a
Yeah.
business. I think a lot of people think, it's a get rich quick process, and no business is.
No.
You've got to put your efforts in the early days to make sure that it's sustainable and it can grow organically. And I also think growing too quick can be dangerous. Cash is so important in a business, and particularly the industry that we're in. It's a very cash hungry business. So
Yeah.
you've just got to cut your cloth and make sure that you've got enough to continue the business moving forward and grow.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. And I think you're aware we're a business coaching organisation. I'm keen to know who the best coaches you work with, whether that's business, sport, life in general. Who's had the biggest influence on you?
Yeah, a guy that I played rugby with, my coach in the early years, he said to me one day, he said, "Team's the most important thing, but there is room for flair as well and individuality, but you've got to get it in that order.
Yes.
The team comes first." And I think that stuck with me, not just in my rugby career, but also through business, is that you're only as good as the people around you.
Yep.
And I think you've got to be aware of what you don't know.
Yeah.
You've got to be honest with yourself, and then find somebody who complements you and is better at you at certain things. And I view myself as just a team builder and filling in the gaps of knowledge that I don't have or the skills I don't have.
Brilliant. I think that is one of those big learnings. I work with a lot of people on it. A business will grow more successfully when it's not about us. It becomes about
Mm.
others. And in fact,
Yeah.
getting out of the way of our own success is a challenge
Mm.
for many people. It's but but
Yeah.
but I guess that's part of the human condition. Is we're very much
Mm.
egocentric. And have you do you have any favorite quotes or sayings about business or success in general?
Apart from the one I just said about sort of team. But I think one thing that came to light was you need to play to win, not just to play to lose, not to lose. And the differential between that is very important, because if you're just in business and try not to lose all the time, you're
Yeah,
firefighting, you're reactive. Whereas if you're trying to win, you're planning, you're thinking forward. And that was something that somebody said to me one day, and it actually stuck, that I don't wake up every morning thinking how am I not going to fail today. I wake up every
brilliant,
morning and think how am I going to succeed today, and I think that
brilliant.
mindset is really, really important.
Absolutely, because I think unfortunately there's a lot of fear around in the early days of running a business. Fear of the failure, fear of cash, so many different things,
Yeah.
and yeah, getting into that mindset of growth of by growing we avoid that. I think is quite difficult for many people, isn't it? It's something you have to learn. I think. Would you feel?
Yeah. I think you have to learn it, and you have to learn it in the early days. And I think if you do start a business very early, you haven't had that life experience to sort of be able to
Yeah,
weigh up, what works and what doesn't work. And so I think working for somebody else, which I have done, focuses the mind. It
Yes.
allows you to learn
Yes.
on somebody else's time almost. But
Ab-
when you can bring that into your business, and
Absolutely.
and I think yes, you've got to accept you do make mistakes, but don't dwell on them. Just make sure you don't do them again.
Absolutely. I think that's the most important thing is it's okay to make mistakes, but only the same one once. We will is one of the
Yeah,
things we always say. And
yeah, absolutely.
do you have any favorite books on business or personal development in general?
I'm not a book reader.
Fine. Yeah, it's
I mentioned in my notes when you asked me to sort of answer a couple of questions. I've also from dyslexia, so I'm a learner by doing,
great.
seeing, using my hands, and that actually has strengthened me a lot because I think dyslexia gives you a focus in a different way, um, and it makes you somebody who I'd love to read. I'd love to be able to sit down and say I've read 100 books, but I've probably in my life only read 3 or 4 books. But I learn in a completely different way. And I
Absolutely.
think for me, there are some brilliant people out there. Not saying that I am, but there are some brilliant people out there who have had the challenge of dyslexia and succeeded. I mean,
Yes.
Richard Branson's a classic example of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, we just learn in a different way, and I think people nowadays are more accepting of that. But when I was younger, they just basically put that into a category of not particularly bright,
Yeah.
which was a challenge.
Yeah, no, it's very unfair how that was the case, and also, I mean, I remember in my school days, often highly intelligent people became troubled pupils, and therefore
Yeah,
we're again put in a category of poor learners just because they were just
yeah,
way more clever than everybody else. Um,
yeah, and it's frustration coming out as well. I
frustration,
mean,
absolutely, could totally get
but
that. And speaking of learning, what have you learned about yourself throughout your journey so far?
I've learned that I guess I am quite robust.
Yep.
I don't accept there isn't a way to do something. If somebody says you can't do it, I'm the person who probably said, "Well, I'm going to do it anyway." So there's obviously an element of risk in everything you do, and I wouldn't say I was a particular risk taker, but to succeed, I think you've got to have an element of that in you. There's nothing more focusing than your house is in the business and everything like that. It
Yeah.
focuses the mind,
Yeah.
and I think that I've learned that if you want to succeed, you've got to take those risks from day one.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes absolute sense. And looking forward now, well, what does the future look like for you guys, and what challenges or risks I get do you
Mm.
see, if any?
Well, we're in a very unstable world at the moment, as we all see, and
Yeah.
business is not immune to that. In fact, it's at the forefront of that.
Yeah.
At both ends, in terms of running a business, the costs have increased dramatically. It's becoming more and more difficult to keep control of those costs. One of the things you can't control are interest rates. You can't control inflation. You can't control the cost of production in lots of ways. So you've got the pressure at the bottom end of that, and at the top end you've got the problems with potential tariffs coming onto to products that we're exporting, a world that is perhaps in economic turmoil. China's not looking great, big market for whiskey. So the
Okay.
challenges moving forward are finding new markets and potentially getting them to buy into a newish entrance into the market, which is English whiskey, which is always a challenge anyway, even in
Yes.
a normal sort of economic outlook. But so I think there are many challenges. But for me, my way forward is not to bury your head and to go look for those opportunities because they are out there. Look at things in a different way. Look at things in a different way. Perhaps look at your product range and how can you develop a different product range that attaches itself to a up and coming market, and just hard work. I mean, meet people. The people bit is so important in any
Yeah.
industry. We've all relied very much, and we're sitting here as an example on Zoom,
Yeah.
and there's nothing like doing a deal face to face
Yeah.
and in person and seeing how the buyer operates. Understanding him. So I think there are many challenges still, and it'll be a tough old 18 months for a lot of businesses in the UK. And I think you've just got to make sure you've got your costs under control and you're looking forward and you're looking for those opportunities that do exist.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Often, an industry challenge or an economic challenge, it's still a level playing field in effect, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's the businesses, organisations that play to win, as you said earlier, rather than play not to
Mm.
lose,
Yeah.
are going to benefit because there is almost always an opportunity in a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've got to go against what everybody else is doing. You've got to and who would have thought setting up Yorkshire's first whiskey distillery was going against what everybody else was doing. So we've always tried to push those boundaries, and it'll come back. All these things are cyclical, they'll come back around again, and you just got to be lean and mean as you're going through the tough times.
I think there's a great quote from Warren Buffett, the world's most successful investor, which I think is something like be bold when other people are scared and scared when other people are bold. And
Yes.
I think that contrarian idea of yeah, let's go in the other
Mm.
direction
Yeah.
is often a successful one.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a classic example in our industry. When the gin thing became a boom, everybody jumped into that one, and we went the opposite direction.
Brilliant.
So, and I think what you've seen that play out at the end is companies struggling because
Yes,
once you lose your identity and differentiation points
absolutely.
because everybody else has done it, the last thing that's left is price. So
Yep,
you end up sort of marketing on price, and once you do that, it's a race to the bottom.
absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And
Mm.
I'm interested in what you say to anyone that's thinking of going to business right now. You've obviously mentioned a few challenges, etc.
Yeah. Wow. Going into business right now. I mean, always opportunities are there, as I said right at the very beginning. I think I think there's with the way if you're borrowing money at the moment, it's tough
Yeah,
because you can't control the sort of overheads. So if you do your business plan and you can survive with the interest rates as they are and slightly higher, build that into your budget, then hopefully, when it comes back around again, you're in a good place. But
great.
but borrowing money at 2% is a lot easier than borrowing money at 7%.
Yeah.
So I would say don't over leverage in the first few years. Try and do as much as you can without getting too many sort of banks knocking on the door. We've built up a business now with a fantastic balance sheet because we've got a whiskey store full of whiskey.
Brilliant, of
Um,
course. Yeah,
so that long-term growth is there because we've managed to build up
brilliant.
all this whiskey, which eventually will find a market.
Yeah,
But it's turning that whiskey back into cash or making sure that you've got enough cash in the business to continue. So
yes.
that's the biggest challenge. Cash is king, and make sure you've got enough in the business.
It's the flow, isn't it? It's making sure it continues to flow.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And just looking back yourself, if you look back on if you started your business again, is there anything significant you do different, do you think?
Um, I probably wouldn't do a lot of things differently because I think we've every step of the way we've thought about, we've tried to predict. It's I guess if I could have started it maybe 10 years earlier, that would have helped,
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
I said. But no, I don't think there's any. I mean, we are very led by principle and the field to bottle story and the
Yeah.
fact that there's a lot of greenwashing going on at the moment, which is sort of frustrating for us because if you claim something, really you should be able to prove it. And I think there's a
Yes.
lot of people who are ticking the green box at the moment, which on face value is probably looks good, but when you look behind the scenes of the DNA of that,
Yeah.
it doesn't really stack up. What frustrates me is, I mean, we're one of the first farms to get carbon credits by the way we farm. So we're locking that carbon back into the soil by not ploughing. We're
Brilliant.
growing cover crops, carbon back into the land. And that's a tangible, measurable thing. But a lot of companies go out there and said, "Oh, buy one of these and we'll plant a tree." My question would be, what tree? Where's it being planted? And how long will it take to actually sequester carbon?
Yeah.
And all of those things, we can do so many more
Yeah.
things quicker to actually help the environment.
Yes.
So yeah, I would just that's probably one thing I would say, looking back, is put more emphasis on the way you make your products and make sure then you can back it up.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And finally, what would be the best advice you can give an 18-year-old you if you could go back in time and do that?
Well, I just start again. It comes back to the starting earlier, but when I say that, I would have lost all of those years of life experience for working with somebody else or
Yes.
being challenged by my sales director. You know, why haven't you sold enough seed this month? You know, and I think those sort of learnings set you up in business really, really well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think I could have started earlier, but probably still would have taken on that first 11 years in the agriculture industry as a good learning base, if you like.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Oh, well, David, it's been fascinating to talk to you now. I absolutely wish you the best of luck with the continued success of what you're doing. I must come out and I will definitely pop over it. So, but
Yeah.
probably like many people didn't even know you were there. So it's great to have this and
Yeah.
come over. And for anyone that's watching that would like to get in touch with you or the Spirit of Yorkshire, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, we're obviously all over social media. We've got our own website, which is spiritofyorkshire.com. The actual brand itself we didn't talk about, but Filey Bay is the brand.
Brilliant.
So if
Great.
you're out there looking for a unique Yorkshire product, which is the first ever, then Filey Bay single malt whiskey would be the choice. And it's in all the shops and stores, good whiskey shops, good whiskey stores around the county and around the country. But also we export 50% of what we make as well. So if you're ever traveling, you'll probably see it around and about as well.
Brilliant. And it's really fascinating how the brain works because now I've seen it, I will see it everywhere. I know it's been there all the time. It's just that not
Yeah, you will see it.
it's just becoming everywhere. So I get that. And David, thank you so much for that. It'd be great to swing by another 6 to 12 months to just see the next
Yeah, yeah.
development and what you're planning. But for now, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Chris, for having me.
Thank you.